my affectionately titled Breaking the Cage, Do's and Don'ts of Adventure Game Writing, with me, Francisco Gonzalez. Who is this Francisco Gonzalez guy? Well, if you don't know me, I've been making adventure games with Adventure Game Studios since about 2001. I made a freeware series for the past 8 years or so called Ben Jordan, Paranormal Investigator, who was the scared young fellow we saw on the desktop before we started. I just released my first commercial title, Golden Wake, this year. Was it this year? Yeah, this year. The indie life is so fast, you know. Anyway. And I'm now a full-time designer for Watch That Game, so hi boss man, how you doing? So hopefully that makes me qualified to give this talk. And I should also preface this talk by saying that if you were here yesterday and heard Dave's talk, I'm going to cover a little bit of the same ground as far as dialogue goes, but not too much hopefully. And also, all of the opinions and views expressed in this talk are my own, so if I say something controversial, you know, that's don't blame Mark. And also, your mileage may vary. You know, I'm just telling you what I've gained through my experience. So, adventure games. They live and they die by their writing. And writing, as I'm going to define it, involves dialogue, story structure, descriptions, narration, everything that you basically have to put pen to paper, or in this case, finger to keyboard, to put in your adventure game. So, there's two hurdles that you want to overcome immediately when you start about writing, or you start thinking about writing your adventure games. That's overdoing it versus underdoing it. You don't want to get carried away, and you know, if you're writing more in the case of dialogue, you don't want to just have your characters give the entire history of themselves or their country, or whatever it is they're talking about. Oh, also I should mention I'm going to try my best not to name check any specific games, but if I do. There's certain games that I can think of where you start a conversation with people and they just blather on and on and on. It's interesting after a while, but then it stops getting interesting, so you don't want to go in that direction. You also have other games where there's not very much said at all. You don't want to just kind of do perfunctory descriptions of things, just, you know, saying what it is and not develop it any further than that. So it's really important to find that middle ground. It's also very tricky to find that middle ground. I am still seeking that elusive middle ground personally, because I tend to go to the hold back camp. So, as an example of this, we have a screenshot here from Shardlight, which I just revealed is the game I'm working on yesterday. And we have the classic adventure game object, a door. The bane of the existence of any adventure game writer, a door. So if you look at the door, and you don't do it, you know, you underdo it. I know, it's right there. You can also overdo it. So, you know, you're trying to make it interesting, but that's a little too much. You know, you don't have to go that far. So a better middle ground would be something like this. It tells you something about the door that's more than just it's a door, and it sets up the idea that maybe it's important for something. Obviously, you want to do this when it is important for something, because if you try doing this too much for other things that may not be so important, I mean, it's a good step to build your world, to kind of have things, descriptions that are a little bit more than just, you know, it is what it is. But, you know, it's a good opportunity to kind of define the character's thoughts about things or their personality, things like that. So, again, the middle ground is where you gotta go. So now let's talk a little bit about dialogue and writing believable dialogue. And the thing about certain adventure games, as well as, well, when you have dialogue in adventure games, one of the things that's easily criticized is the dialogue, because that's essentially what you're hearing. You're hearing all the characters talking and saying their pieces and all that sort of thing. So when you're writing dialogue for an adventure game, you have to consider, how do people speak? That's one of the main things I think about, because you have this opportunity in any adventure game to have this eclectic cast of characters, depending on your setting, and you have the opportunity to just have different types of people. I mean, judging, anything about them could be, you think about their social standing, their class, their race, any aspect of a person. No two people necessarily speak the same way, but you also have to think about where they come from and what it says about them. So a maid, a poor working class maid, for example, is not going to have the same register or the same type of language as some posh rich person that she works for. Also, when writing dialogue, you need to think about what information needs to be given when a character speaks, and this plays into the whole interesting dialogue versus just perfunctory dialogue, where if you talk to a character and their only purpose is to say, well, this door is locked, you should find a way to open it, and nothing beyond that, I mean, there's really no reason that you need that character, or you could have just put a sign that said that, they serve no purpose. If you give them some sort of interesting thing that they have to say, not going too far out, I mean, you don't want them to tell you about their grandmother that was eaten by wolves either, but as long as it is interesting within that world, maybe they could tell you a little something about the world that relates to the door being locked or whatever. And that goes to how can your characters be interesting. The thing about adventure games as well is, I mean, you want memorable characters, even if it's just something as simple as, they are afraid of cats, or they have just something about them that makes them stick out. They're not just someone standing there that's only purpose is to give you a key. My best advice for writing dialogue is read it out loud, because sometimes things that read great on paper, I can't read, sound terrible when they're spoken. It's happened to me so many times, because I do something, I don't know how many people do this, but when I write dialogue in my games, I always do it on the fly. I just think, okay, what's the point of this conversation? I write everything out, and then I go back and I tweak it later on. And one of the main things I do is I read it out loud, because you can have this great, what you think is great dialogue, and then you go back and you think, okay, you read it out loud, blah, 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 and it just sounds unnatural the way you say it, or you notice that you subconsciously repeated a word. I wrote something the other day, and I used the word, I don't remember what word it was, but it was like literally like 2 words after it, and I thought, okay, no, that's not right. So you have to go back and do that. So reading it out loud and just imagining how the people speak, that's basically my advice for writing believable sounding dialogue. Here's another thing. If your native language is not the same as your games, I know most adventure games are English, get an editor. Get someone who knows the language, because language is a very interesting thing. Language is something that is very much influenced not only by culture. I mean, you have languages that are influenced by other languages, influenced by just culture. I mean, English itself, how many variants of English are there, If I was thinking of an example, and I realized my example is very American-centric, because I'm American. How many people here know what the SATs are? Okay. So that's the Scholastic Aptitude Test. That's basically the test for those you don't know. It's basically what you take when you're in high school, which I guess is the equivalent of, well, it's the thing you take in your last year of school to get into university, the equivalent in college. College, yes. So we'll get into it. It'll become relevant in the next slide anyway. But anyway, my point is that if you are writing your game, and your game is set, for example, let's say you're European, or you're English, or what have you. You're not American, and you're writing a game that's set in the United States, and you're writing Americans. And you write them, and you get to a certain point where they use slang or something, and if you just subconsciously put in some sort of Britishism or something like that, it sticks out like a sore thumb to anyone who isn't, or anyone who is American. If you have, if I tried doing a game that was set in, well, let's not knock any adventure games, let's knock a AAA game. Let's take Assassin's Creed Unity, for example, which is set in revolutionary France, but for some reason everyone talks like this. So that sticks out not just because you're writing in another country that's, that sticks out because of the accents, but if you're doing something that's set in a specific place, in a specific time, what have you, try and get somebody, if you can, that knows more about that, or someone who is from that area, because the little nuances, if you get them wrong, it's totally an immersion killer. I mean, again, we'll knock another game, Heavy Rain, which is supposed to take place in some undisclosed American city, and the voice acting and the dialogue was clearly not written by A, an American, and B, a native English speaker.
See a human.
And it just does not come across as believable. I mean, it's difficult. So writing is fun. Wordplay is even more fun. Dictionaries are not so fun. This is a case of getting carried away. And the reason I brought up the SATs was because one of the ways that you prepare for the SATs, one of the things on the SATs is vocabulary. And there are several preparations that, for example, there's a novel called Tooth and Nail, which is an SAT prep book. It's framed as a novel, but it has all the words that are on the SAT, all the difficult words highlighted in bold. So it's very unnatural because it's like, you know, so she went into the room and saw the painting and he was nictitating. It's like, yeah. Another example is the TV show Dawson's Creek, which I never watched, but it was famous for, they were high school kids and they were using these huge words. So I'm guilty of having kind of big words in my game, but if you put in big words and just you have to be using a dictionary to play the game just because you don't, it's, you know, you're trying to be fancy and you're this super high register, that's not so fun. So don't get carried away as far as using flowery language and things like that.
Or into the game dictionary.
I have not played the game dictionary.
But add one.
I thought you said, what about in the game dictionary? Sorry. Well, if you want. So I guess kind of to wrap up, the TLDR version of this talk is when writing your game, do be concise and to the point. Don't make your dialogues overly long. Don't make your descriptions overly long. Avoid cliches and the obvious. Please don't use puns. You can try and avoid them. Don't state the obvious. Don't say it's a door, it's a chair. We know, we can see it. And make your characters interesting. Don't have constant info dumps. Don't have, let me tell you all about the entire history of everything. Don't make caricatures instead of characters. Give them more than one dimension. And don't be on the nose, which basically speaks to the same thing of this is this. Has anyone played Sonic 2006? I'm sorry. So I just watched some cutscenes from this, and this was an example of the most on-the-nose dialogue I've ever seen. It was literally, first of all, Sonic pulls a Chaos Emerald out of his butt, which I don't understand what's happening. He's like, it's a Chaos Emerald. I'm afraid. Let's go over here, and Dr. Eggman, whatever. Terrible. Don't do that. So thank you for your time. Follow me on Twitter at Grundislav Games if you want to listen to me talk about this sort of thing more with an Australian. You can listen to the Blue Cup Tools podcast at BCP Podcast. So, Q&A.
Was you saying you've learned this from experience? So, any particular examples from your own games where you've failed to follow the rules that you've brought out today?
Oh, absolutely. Jordan 8, the very first conversation you have with Percival Clinton Jones, who I nicknamed Info Q Dump. It basically is like a very long, pointless, well not pointless, but it's a very long, let me tell you all about what you should probably have observed already as a player. With A Golden Wake, I mean, I thought I was writing a lot of on-the-nose, I feel this way dialogue, but it may not necessarily have come across that way, which is why I say I'm still looking for the middle ground. But yeah, I'm just as guilty of all of these sins as anyone. So I'm trying to think of so if anyone else has any examples, if they played any of my games, you can call me out. I don't mind, I can take it. Just don't throw tomatoes at me.
So, what if your game requires a lot of information to be, shared with the player? What would you advise how to do it? I mean, you don't want a big info dump, as you say, but what would be a good way of doing it?
Well, I think environmental storytelling is a very interesting way of doing it. And one thing that I've mentioned that I've been interested in trying out, which I think I'm going to explore in Shardlight, is the idea of background conversations, where you don't necessarily have to engage the character in a conversation. You might be able to pick up either some relevant information or just some world-building thing by, you know, walking by and hearing these characters talking about something. But environmental storytelling also, I mean, you're in a place and you see, you know, some corpses on the ground and they have, you know, things, you know, it's apparent that something happened here, some sort of battle, and you hear about it afterwards and you think, oh, okay, so this happened. Another way of doing it, which I'm not too happy with, but I don't know if there's a better way to incorporate it, is, for example, in games like Dishonored, where there's this rich world, but you kind of have to go out of your way to read books and notes and things to learn more about it.
Yeah.
That's sort of an interesting way of doing it, but doing it too much is a little bit more, I mean, doing it too much is not a good thing.
Skyrim, basically.
I have not played Skyrim, but
Well, there's loads of books in there, and nobody reads them. So.
Well, like Fallout 3 in New Vegas, for example, I only hacked so many terminals to read people's emails before I got bored of it. I mean, it's cute that they have these little like stories of, you know, like inter-office, you know, backstabbing and things like that, but I mean, I want to shoot things, I don't want to read.
Like Deus Ex, like Bioshock, all of them do.
Oh,
You
yeah,
pick
yeah,
up and then you realise that, I was saying this yesterday, you realise you're walking around listening to this lovely answering machine, you realise you have to go and stand still, because otherwise you won't be able to hear what they're saying.
Yeah, I just played Bioshock for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and it was just like I'm running around, you know, these people are shooting things and screaming at me, and I have these people talking to me, and I'm like, what? No, stop it. I can't take it.
Or worse, somebody's talking to you, and something comes up
Yes.
and shoots you while you're listening to it.
Exactly. Anybody else? Oh, yes.
Would you say plot or character is more important to you?
Plot or characters? They're both pretty important. I mean, characters are important as far as, I mean, well, characters make the plot, really.
It's a tricky situation where you have to balance the two. Like, do you start out with a plot in mind, or do you have a character that you develop and then build a plot around it?
Usually what I've done is, I write out the plot first. I mean, with the exception of the main character, usually, who I have, a general idea of what they are. Yeah, I mean, I'll write the plot, and then as I go, I'll bring in characters as necessary and puzzles and things like that, too. So, but yeah, I mean, plot is definitely what I go for first. But characters are important. Yes?
What would you say your advice would be to story structure as a whole, like an overarching narrative, how to hit those points instead of just individual levels?
How to hit the points of
well, like, what do you do to structure stories in adventure games specifically?
Well, what I do is I usually just make a very skeletal design document, kind of what I want to happen from start to finish and points in between, and then just kind of flesh them out as I go, which is a very vague answer, I know, but I just, I think about where we're starting, where we're going to end, and just figure out the middle somehow. Write it all on the fly. I don't know what I'm doing. And with that, I should probably quit my job. Sorry, I quit.